In 1960s Texas, the kitchen was never just one room. On a working cattle ranch in West Texas, the cook shack fed 12 men before sunup. In San Antonio, the kitchen ran from 4 in the morning when the grandmother started the masa. Texas was not one kind of cooking. It was 8 or 9 kinds running at the same time across a state so large that the food in Brownsville shared almost nothing with the food in Texarkana. These meals came from German and Czech settlers in the hill country, from Mexican-American families along the Rio Grande, from African-American cooks in the piney woods, and from ranch kitchens that had to feed a crew without a grocery store within 50 miles. Most have either disappeared or been simplified past recognition. Hit subscribe before we get into it. This is 10 meals that built the Texas table, starting with number 10. Number 10, chicken fried steak with cream gravy. Every roadside cafe in Texas in the 1960s had this on the daily plate lunch for under $1. The cut was usually a round steak, one of the cheapest pieces of beef available. The cook beat it with a mallet until the connective tissue broke down, pressed it into seasoned flour, dipped it in a milk and egg wash, and pressed it into flour again. Into a heavy pan of hot lard 2 inches deep, and left alone until the crust turned a deep amber. The dish traces back to German and Austrian immigrants who brought Wiener Schnitzel techniques into Texas in the 1800s and adapted them to the abundant beef. The cream gravy is the part that is entirely Texan. Pan drippings, flour stirred in over heat, then whole milk whisked in until thick. Black pepper, heavy. It went over the steak and onto the mashed potatoes beside it. Number 9, pinto beans with salt pork. Ranch cooks hung a cast iron pot over an open fire before dawn, dropped in a pound of dried pintos soaked overnight, and added a chunk of salt pork or a ham hock. That pot simmered all day. By the 4th hour, the skins began to split and the broth turned thick and dark with rendered fat and starch from the beans. Nobody measured anything. A pinch of cumin, a dried ancho pepper dropped in whole, raw onion on top when the bowl hit the table. The pot could feed 20 ranch hands or a family of 6 for 3 days on $1 worth of beans and a 15-cent piece of salt pork. Farmers, cotton pickers, and roughnecks across the state, pinto beans crossed every line of work and every region. Almost no household in the 1960s was without them at least 3 days a week. Number 8, King Ranch casserole. The King Ranch in South Texas, one of the largest ranches in the United States, covering about 825,000 acres, has never claimed this recipe. The casserole got its name because someone needed a suitably Texan title. What the dish actually came from was the collision of Tex-Mex home cooking with post-war convenience food, tracing back to chilaquiles, tortillas layered with chicken, chile, and cheese. The 1960s version used 2 cans of condensed soup, cream of mushroom and cream of chicken, plus a can of Rotel diced tomatoes and green chilies. Shredded chicken folded in, corn tortillas torn and layered in a baking dish, grated cheddar on top, oven at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. By the mid-1960s, it appeared in junior league cookbooks from Dallas to Corpus Christi and at church potlucks across the state. Lady Bird Johnson served it at her ranch in the hill country. Number 7, barbacoa de cabeza. On Saturday nights in South Texas in the 1960s, a family dug a hole in the yard, built a mesquite fire down inside, and when the wood burned to coals, lowered in a whole cow's head, cheeks, tongue, jowl, everything, cleaned, salted, and wrapped in maguey leaves. The pit was covered with burlap and dirt, tamped down tight. By Sunday morning, after 8 to 10 hours, the meat pulled with 2 fingers. The cheeks were the most prized cut. Fatty, concentrated, nothing like oven-cooked beef. It came out on corn tortillas with fresh salsa, cilantro, and raw white onion. This was Sunday breakfast in Laredo, Brownsville, and McAllen from the 1920s through the 1960s. Modern health codes made commercial in-ground pit cooking illegal. Vera's Backyard Bar B-Qui in Brownsville holds a grandfathered permit and is one of the last places in Texas legally allowed to use the original underground pit. Number 6, calf fries. Every spring on Texas cattle ranches, bull calves were castrated during branding season, and the material was never thrown away. Ranch cooks took the testicles, split the outer membrane, sliced the inner tissue into medallions, and dropped them into seasoned flour and cornmeal, then into hot lard. The rougher ranch version was simpler still. thrown directly onto the branding fire coals, pulled out, and eaten with a little salt. The fried version became standard at ranch cookouts, county fairs, and stockyard steakhouses in Fort Worth, deep fried at 350 to 375 degrees Fahrenheit until golden outside and firm inside. In West Texas and the Rolling Plains, spring branding meant calf fries at the end of the workday. They were never presented as a delicacy, and nobody left them on the plate. Number 5, tamales. In December, in Mexican-American households across South and West Texas, the tamalada began. Corn husks were soaked overnight. The masa was made from nixtamalized corn ground to a thick dough, then worked with lard, warm broth, salt, and baking powder until a ball of it floated in a glass of water. The sign the air content was right. The filling was pork braised in red chile, ancho, guajillo, a little cumin, shredded and kept warm. The assembly ran like a production line. One person spread masa, another added filling, a third folded, and stood each tamale upright in a large pot. 100 tamales steamed for 90 minutes. A batch that size fed a family through Christmas and New Year's and left enough for neighbors. The tamalada itself, the gathering, the work done together, was as important as the food. Number 4, jalapeno cornbread. Texas cornbread took no sugar. The batter came together with stone-ground yellow cornmeal, buttermilk, 2 eggs, and a spoonful of lard. Into that batter went a full cup of diced fresh jalapenos, not a tablespoon, a cup. Some cooks also stirred in a can of cream-style corn and a handful of shredded cheddar. The skillet, already greased and preheated in the oven at 425 degrees, went back in with the batter on top. The cold batter hit the hot fat, and the crust started immediately. 20 to 25 minutes until the edges pulled away from the iron. The bottom came out dark and crackling, the interior dense with corn and jalapeno heat running through every bite. It went alongside pinto beans, barbecue, or greens across every region and every income level in the state. Number 3, pot liquor and cornbread. In East Texas, in the pine forests pressed up against Louisiana, a pot of greens started in the morning and did not come off the stove until evening. Collard greens, mustard greens, or turnip greens, whatever the garden had, went into a pot with smoked ham hocks and water. 2 to 3 hours at a low simmer, the leaves going from stiff to completely soft, the broth deepening as pork fat, salt, and bitter greens cooked into each other. The pot liquor was what was left when the greens were done, not a side effect. It was the point. Nutrient-dense and deeply savory. The proper way to eat it was to crumble cold cornbread into the bowl and let it absorb the broth. In the 1930s, this question, crumble or dunk, generated a public debate between a Southern governor and a newspaper journalist. In East Texas in the 1960s, most crumbled. Number 2, klobasneks. Czech immigrants settled farming communities of central Texas starting in the 1850s in the corridor between San Antonio, Austin, and Houston that became the Czech Belt. They built churches and bakeries that held their food traditions intact for over a century. The kolač, a soft, sweet yeast pastry filled with fruit jam or poppy seeds, was the centerpiece of church bazaars across those communities. The klobasnek came from a specific place. The Village Bakery in West Texas, on the highway between Dallas and Waco, opened in 1952. Baker Wendell Montgomery took the same enriched yeast dough used for sweet kolaches and wrapped it around a link of smoked sausage. By the 1960s, klobasneks appeared at breakfast tables and country stores across Navarro, McLennan, and Fayette counties. Travelers called them sausage kolaches. The correct name is klobasnek, and the distinction mattered to the people who made them. Number 1, chess pie. Every Texas kitchen in the 1960s had the ingredients for chess pie at all times, which is exactly why it existed. Eggs, sugar, butter, a splash of apple cider vinegar, and in some versions a tablespoon of cornmeal. That was the filling. No fruit, no cream. The lard pastry crust went into a 9-inch tin. The filling stirred together cold and poured in. Baked at 325 degrees for about 50 minutes until the top formed a thin, crackled skin and the interior was set but still moved faintly in the center. The vinegar was the key. Half a teaspoon of acid in that amount of sugar cut the sweetness to something that did not overwhelm after 2 bites. The cornmeal added a faint graininess that distinguished it from a standard custard. One pie served 8 people and cost almost nothing. The name has 2 competing explanations: stored in a pie chest, shortened over time, or a cook asked what kind of pie said Jess pie. Both are old enough that nobody alive can verify which one is right. These 10 dishes crossed every region and tradition that made Texas cooking what it was. Ranch food, border food, hill country food, East Texas food, all running at the same time, rarely overlapping, each piece belonging to the people and the place that made it. Most are harder to find now than they were 60 years ago. If one of them came off your family's table, leave a comment and tell me which one.